Hi, my name is Alex Van Bergen. My background is in family science. So I'm the co-chair of the Family Environments session. We have three great talks for you today. I am a research scientist here at ISRD. Okay, so the three talks we have, the first is on couple time use during the empty nest transition, and that will be presented by Ashley Forbush, actually virtually. Ashley recently completed her master's degree from Brigham Young University and will start a PhD program in human development and family science at the University of Texas at Austin. Ashley's research interests focus on couple conflict, power dynamics, and other interaction patterns and the related implications for partners and their children. The second talk we have is on aging society, family care, and time poverty, presented by Sang-Oh Kim. Sang-Oh Kim is currently a PhD candidate at Cornell University, who is starting his new position as a postdoc fellow at the Institute of Transportation next spring. His research focuses on the intersection of aging society and travel behavior, with special attention towards family care burdens. And our last talk of all of the oral sessions today is Matrilineal kin networks in the United States, 1850 to 1940, and that will be presented by Matt Nelson. Matt Nelson is a research scientist in the Institute for Social Research and Data Innovation at the University of Minnesota. He has helped produce the IPUMS Ancestry Full Count Census Data, 1790 to 1950, for the past 10 years for the wider research community. Thanks, Matt. His research interests focus on identifying non-co-residential kinship networks using census data, measuring the effects of kinship networks on demographic outcomes, and assessing data quality in historical data sets. So with that, we will have the first presenter. Thank you.
Okay, is everything good for me to go? Okay, gonna share my screen. Okay, hi everyone. My name's Ashley Forbush, and like they said, I'm a graduate student, just finished my master's at BYU, and then I'm heading to UT Austin in a couple weeks. But today I'll be presenting on couple time use during the empty nest transition. Okay, sorry, just got a message. Okay, so the empty nest transition, it's this considerable transition period for couples, similar to like the transition to parenthood. And couples, they like during this transition, they really have to renegotiate a lot of their roles and responsibilities because the structure of their family is changing. And in qualitative research, couples, one of the main things that they talk about in that research is that they have more time to spend together, and that this transition can be a really good opportunity for increased connection and communication. But they also report that this period can contribute to a lot of relational uncertainty as well. So there's kind of these differing outcomes from it. And then despite the significance of this transition and the implications for couples, very little is known about it. There just hasn't been a lot of research looking at this. So this study is specifically focusing on time use during this transition. And in general, shared couple time is shown to facilitate greater love, satisfaction, more intimacy, and greater relationship quality in couple relationships. And the amount of time couples are able to spend together, it depends on a variety of factors, and children is one of those main factors, where having children in the home and raising children, even though it can be rewarding and important, it does limit the amount of time couples can spend together. And in addition to that, there is this idea or cultural shift to intensive parenting within the past couple of decades. So couples who have children, they do spend a significant portion of their time raising their kids. And then in general, within the past few decades, parents tend to be devoting more time to parenting than ever before, which makes us think that during this empty nest transition, this really would be a considerable shift in like the amount of time couples are spending together, and the quality of that time as well. But like mentioned previously, there's just very few quantitative studies looking at this. So the first primary aim was to examine whether there were differences in the total quantity of shared couple time, both like one-on-one, so both partners, only them spending time together, and then shared time with other people present as well, across this transition. And then we also wanted to see whether there were differences in the quantity of shared couple time among like different domains or activities of shared time. So leisure time, screen time, meals, eating, drinking, things like that. And I assume if people are at this conference, they're fairly familiar with, okay, I don't know why these are coming out of order. There we go, there's the first one. But I assume most people here are familiar with the CPS and ADIS data set, so I didn't include a ton of information on that, but we used both. Using the CPS allowed us to identify empty nesters, and then we linked the ADIS, the American Time Use Survey data, to that. So to be included in the study, the CPS respondents, they had to have completed the ADIS survey. And then we only included married or cohabiting couples since we're focusing on that. And then we made sure that at some point during the 8 interviews for the CPS data, that couples only had one child living at home between the ages of 17 to 23 during that time period. And then we identified empty nester couples whose last child had left the home by identifying if any of those couples, if their child had left the home during any of the CPS interviews. And so that left us with 3,211 respondents who were parents. So for the time use measures, we measured total shared couple time, which was the total amount of time couples spent together throughout the day with others present, as well as like their partner. And then total one-on-one couple time was measured where couples were together with nobody else present. And then we measured a bunch of different types of activities. So active leisure, inactive leisure, eating and drinking, screen time, home duties, other activities. And then we also looked at the location, if it was at home or away from home, where couples were spending their time. And then to determine whether couples were empty nesters or not, this was a binary variable, whether a parent had recently experienced the transition to the empty nest or not. And so one limitation with this is that the child may or may not have moved by the time of the ADIS interview, which was like 2 to 5 months after the CPS interview. But that left us with 872 couples who had transitioned into the empty nest phase, and then over 2,000 couples who still had a child at home. And in our analyses, we controlled for the age of the parent, sex, income, education level, marital status, and whether they were employed or not. So first, just to highlight the t-test and looking at these differences in time use, all of these are measured in minutes per day. But as you can see, the amount of couple shared time, so like the total amount of time they were spending together, even if other people were present, it didn't really seem to change that much for empty nesters versus non-empty nesters. The only thing that did seem to change, which is expected, is the amount of time, shared time with household children there. And then shared time with others, it does seem like part of that time parents were spending with their children, once they become empty nesters, that does seem to shift a little bit. Okay. And then one-on-one time, we do see a lot, like most of these domains or types of couple time use, they do seem to be significant. So, and the expected direction. So couples tend to be spending more one-on-one time together when they're empty nesters versus when they still have a child at home. And so we also conducted several regressions to examine how this changes, and including all of our covariates. And so, as you can see here, we basically see the same results as the t-test, but with shared couple time. We can see that the total amount of shared time it does for empty nesters, they report around 32 minutes more per day spending time together than those who are not empty nesters. It does seem that shared time at home seems to be greater for empty nesters versus non-empty nesters. And then again, time with children, that should be a negative. That's a typo there. Is less for empty nesters, and then time with others is greater. So, and then again, with one-on-one couple time use, it appears that the amount of one-on-one time couples are able to spend together when they're empty nesters, it looks like they spend over 60 minutes or like over an hour more together compared to non-empty nesters. A lot of that looks like it's at home, but some of that does look like it's away from home as well. And then inactive leisure, screen time, household duties, eating and drinking, all of those activities, it looks like empty nesters spend more time compared to non-empty nesters. So just some basic conclusions from that. In general, the amount of shared time that couples spent together didn't really tend to differ that much between empty nesters and non-empty nesters. But one-on-one time, it did significantly differ for almost all of these activities. And what's interesting is that like the qualitative research on couple time use and the empty nest transition, it like really one of the main themes is that couples are perceiving that they spend a lot more time together as a couple once their children leave the home. And so while it may not adjust that much, the changed context without the children there, with more like exclusive time for couples, it probably just feels a lot different to couples and feels like they are spending more time together. So unfortunately, I ran out of time to do this before the conference, but we were interested in a few more things along this line of thinking. We wanted to look at the proportions of time, like what percentage of the day is spent in one-on-one time with one's partner. And then we were also wanting to look at the quality of time. And one thing that prompted this idea was that a lot of couples, I'll just go back really quick to this, a lot of couples, it looked like they're spending quite a bit more time as empty nesters, like using screen time. But active leisure, it didn't seem to be significant. Like empty nesters weren't spending more time doing active things with their partner compared to non-empty nesters. So that really made us wonder with the quality of shared time, like how much are partners really enjoying their increased time together or their increased one-on-one time together? And yeah, like what does the quality of that look like? Because that is shown to predict different outcomes for couples. And that is it. Thank you for letting me present.
Okay, I guess I'm good to go. Yep, thank you. So my name is Sang-ok Kim. I'm a PhD candidate at Cornell University Department of City and Regional Planning. I'm giving a presentation titled Aging Society, Family Care, and Travel Time Budget. Before I begin, I just want to say that this is very much a work in progress, so I would love to get as much feedback as possible from more experienced IPUMS specialists here. So firstly, these somewhat poetic terms all refer to a single population group that is focus of my research, the family caregivers of older adults. And as you can tell from the adjectives like a shadow or invisible, these people have been long placed in the margins of government policy as well as research because of the deep-rooted cultural gender norms against these people. Yet their role in sustaining our economy and society is far from insignificant. Millions of Americans commit many hours per week to unpaid family care, and once combined, this labor of love can culminate to billions of dollars per year. And we also know, or some of you may actually have the personal experience of how disruptive elder caregiving can be. Its ripple effect can be seen in one's work life, social life, and more. And as someone with a transportation planning background, what I'm specifically interested in is how could such ripple effect be expressed in transportation terms, as in what is elder caregiving's impact on one's travel behavior. And there has been literature that has looked into these issues, the one being the mobility of care in urban planning, and the other being more general gender and labor studies in sociology. But many of these studies in this field about caregiver burden have been, a lot of them have been qualitative in nature. They have relied on relatively small surveys, and almost none of them have focused on the temporal dimension. So with this study, I have been trying to address these gaps. So from this end, basically, I have attempted to, again, conduct empirical studies on family care of older adults with these two research questions in mind. How the travel time profile of elder caregivers compare to others, and how do gender, household structure, and social economic characteristics affect travel times of elder caregivers. So to answer my questions, I have used the American Time Use Survey data from 2011 to 2019, specifically relying on its elder care modules. Of the data, about 6% of the individuals could be classified as the caregivers, which I have defined as those who have provided care or assistance to an older adult at least 2 or 3 times a week for the past 3 months. Not surprisingly, across those 9 years of data, there has always been more females than males who could be classified as somebody providing elder care. One of the main challenges that I encountered working with ATS data was the fact that there is not actually a trouble category that measures the elder care trouble specifically. Instead, trouble for elder care were kind of scattered and hidden across more general categories of daily activity, such as this example you can see up here. This person reported taking an aging parent out for dinner as a elder care activity he conducted on the survey day. But the travels back and forth for that were recorded as travel for eating and drinking because in the ATS data, travel for elder care is seen as the secondary activity. So I compiled my own elder care travel variable by following these steps. I basically identified the caregivers who actually perform elder care on the survey day, and then I pulled together the travel episodes right before and after that specific elder care related activities. And then after pulling them together, I excluded work and education travel, and then basically added up the travel times. And right off the bat, descriptive statistics show that quite clearly that elder caregivers seem to be spending more time traveling than those who are not caregivers. And the same relationship holds true for the females and male as well. And also note that women spend more time traveling for elder care purposes than men, just slightly. Now, about my actual regression method, some of you may have noticed that in the descriptive statistics I showed you that the kind of effective sample size for the caregivers decreased from some 5,000 to 2,800. And that is because almost half of the caregivers in my original sample reported 0 value for the travel time, meaning that these people did not conduct any of out-of-home travels on the survey day. So this basically gave me a data with a lot of 0 values. What to do about them? So I chose to basically do a hurdle model that the people often use where you have a zero inflate data. So basically, I fitted a first part, logic part, where I predict the likelihood of somebody conducting traveling at all on the survey day. And I fitted that data into my second gamma model, basically, provided that this person's travel time is not 0, how do different social, demographic, economic variables affect that travel time variable value. So for the travel time values, I'm looking at the total travel time and elder care travel time as my two dependent variables, and I threw in the mix of a standard independent variables, including the travel time spent for other purposes like work, education, social leisure, as well as the person's access to car. Now I'll be showing the result. So firstly, who are more likely to make any trip on the survey day? So here's the first result table, and you'll see the results from the first part on the middle column and the predicted overall travel time on the right column. So the result from the logic part shows that on the survey day, holding all else equal, being identified as a caregiver is associated with 66% likelihood of making a travel, which is in fact the second strongest predictor of making a trip after having a job. So overall, basically, someone who is performing elder care is expected to spend about 68 minutes traveling in total on the survey day, again, holding all as equal. Also note that woman is associated with lower likelihood to make any trip on survey day, but also predicted to spend less time traveling overall than men, which is in line with the general understanding from the travel behavior literature in transportation planning. Now I'll talk about how different factors seem to influence a person's likelihood to conduct elder care travels. Firstly, there was an interesting pattern with how someone's age is associated with likelihood to engage in out-of-home elder care activities. So the reference group here is those aged 29 or less, and you'll notice that the likelihood of making a trip related to elder care is highest for both gender for 50 to 59 age group. And this was interesting because studies from AARP or CDC constantly put people in their early 50s as the most active elder caregivers in America. Also, you'll notice that age effect is consistently greater for women compared to men. Overall, when I analyzed the interaction between gender and age, it has shown that females aged 50 to 59 was 51% more likely to be making elder care trips than rest of the population. So basically, once again, it shows that at the population level, women, especially those in their 50, 59, are most likely to be caregivers of older adults in America. But there is evidence to show that these gender effects could be moderated by household circumstances. So here I'm showing the regression table with elder care travel as dependent variable. It shows in the middle that female gender is associated with 58% likelihood of making a trip, but that likelihood is lower if you are married or if you have children. So basically, if you are a parent or if you're married, it is less likely that you'll be conducting trips related to elder care on a given day. In fact, so when I kind of pull that together, it is kind of predicted that whereas if you're just a woman, that the gender woman is associated with 32 minutes of doing elder care travel on the day, but if you're a married person with children, that goes down to about 20 minutes. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but basically, again, women are more likely to provide elder care, but effects are possibly moderated by household structure. Now, one thing you might be thinking about is what about the men who are performing elder care, right? I'm going to talk about that later, but for now, I want to point out that if you're someone employed, you are 58% likely to also perform elder care trip on a survey day and predict spend about 21 minutes of your travel time to perform that elder care. So overall, just from my analysis, it can be argued that working caregivers spending up to 30 minutes of their travel time to perform elder care. This relationship between work and care responsibilities provide I think, great segue to talk about how it interacts with other travel categories. For this purpose, I compared 5 different categories: work, education, personal care, shopping, and social leisure. Of these 5, only 2 came up with a significant value, both of them negative in direction. So basically, in my interpretation, it suggests that elder care is potentially squeezing people out of time to access other opportunities to maintain their well-being and welfare, as well as access job opportunities, potentially. Finally, I'm going to talk more about the comparative impact of gender on travel time for those involved in elder care and childcare. So before I talked about how women are more likely to conduct any trip about elder care, right? Now I'm focusing more on their elder care travel time. And what I'm seeing is that, so in this chart, what I'm showing is a percentage increase in overall household serving travel time associated with being elder care provider. So the reference groups are essentially men and women who are not involved in elder care. And what you'll see is that once you take on that elder care responsibility, your household serving travel time increases, but quite similarly for both gender. This was somewhat unexpected result because we are, again, at the population level, there is no doubt that women are more likely to be a caregiver. So I compare that with childcare, and I see this. The percentage increase in travel time as a mother is much higher than men. Basically, if you again, I think this difference in the magnitude of increase kind of tells me that potentially men's role in elder care situation could be more significant than we often think than in the childcare situation, and that it also points towards how maybe if you look at different specific tasks involved in elder care, there are some areas where potentially men could be doing more than what we often expect them to be. So just to recap some of the key findings. Finally, firstly, there is no doubt that at population level, caregiving burden is on women mostly, but looking narrowly at just one small segment called the transportation, which is again one dimension of caregiving, men's role could potentially be greater than people often imagine. I think this may point towards a need to be more careful and nuanced in thinking about the care burden and perhaps more focus on how specific different tasks of elder care and associated burden of that are distributed along population. So basically, for sometimes when I read the literature, I see people distinguish between the instrumental care, such as helping with transportation or finances, versus affectionate care, such as giving bathing or more, intimate care to someone you're old, right? So basically, maybe if we start distinguishing these different care categories, we could see how some burdens maybe fall differently between men, women, rich and poor, those who live in cities and not. And she's telling me to stop, so I'll just say that transportation policy could be used to improve the work-life balance among those who face the caregiving burdens. And finally, I'm just very interested in how past experience of transportation could affect a person's mobility decision in their later life. So I would love to, again, talk to you guys more and learn more about how I can link the data to link person's later life mobility outcome with their early early life use of transportation and things like that. So thank you, and sorry for going over the time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you all for coming. I know it's been a long day, so I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. My name is Matt Nelson. I'm a research scientist here at ISRD, and I'm going to be talking about my research into non-co-residential kinship networks, focusing on matrilineal non-co-residential kinship networks. And so just really quickly, the kind of research question I'm interested in is, first off, what can we even do with linked census data to identify kinship? Obviously, identifying co-residential kin, pretty easy because we have relationship to head in the census, so we can always identify who's related to who in the census. However, the U.S. historically has, there's not a lot of co-residency with parents once you move out of the parent's household. And so because of that, we lose a lot of potential kinship identifiers, which can affect a lot of different demographic outcomes. Living near parents, they can help with, it improves fertility chances, improves mortality chances, deciding who you migrate to, childcare and elder care, this last presentation, those are all dependent on having kin living nearby. And so I'm kind of interested in trying to answer those questions. But I'm specifically curious about separating between matrilineal and patrilineal kin, because historically, and still often true today, when women got married, they changed their surname and you lose track of their kinship network. So the data I'm going to use is all linked historical census data. I'm going to be using IPUMS MLP linked census data. They've started linking, we've released links for the census data to Social Security Numident administrative records. These are very powerful because they have parental names in the records. Unfortunately, that's still a work in progress. It's running right now on the stats servers. So I'm not going to have any results on that today. I'm also using LifeM data. The benefit of LifeM data is that they link administrative records and vital records, so birth, marriage, and death records. And so again, you can identify parents' names from that. And then I'm also going to use census tree data because census tree includes genealogical links. So again, it's that ever married women's divide I'm very interested in. And so that's going to be the strengths of the LifeM and the census tree. There's kind of two broad ways of identifying kin in census data. The first is kind of this indirect way of using linked records. And if you live with, say, your mother or your father in a census year, you can pull that information to another year. And that's often how a lot of like intergenerational mobility studies work. They look at the father's occupation in 1 year, and then they pull that over to a second year to see how mobility has changed. The other way is to use a direct link, like I just mentioned, so using genealogical records or administrative records, which help identify additional parents, siblings, children, etc. So this is a slide I stole from Kathy Fitch from the workshop yesterday that I edited slightly. So basically, this is showing all the different crosswalks from all three data sets. So it shows every single census crosswalk we have for IPUMS MLP, Census Tree, and LifeM. And so, like I said, most research tends to use kind of a dyad approach. You look at one census year, you have a treatment that happens in between, and then you look at the outcome in the second census year. For most research applications, that works perfectly fine. For kinship, it doesn't work great because in this example, this is like a dyad approach first to start with. So we have two households in 1900 that now link to 1910. They're living in the same household in 1910. Again, going back to that indirect method, we know that Aaron and Pearl are Edith's parents here because the relationship to head tells us so. So we can pull that information back to 1900 or to whatever census years that person is linked to. The problem with the dyad approach doesn't work well if the person isn't linked to another census year. So in this case, Aaron and Pearl, given that it's 1900, 1940, and the first couple were already married in 1900, odds are they're probably dead in 1940, but not necessarily. Either way, they're not linked. So we have no idea who Edith's parents are in this case, which means we lose that potential kinship network. So I guess the innovation I'm proposing that we need to start doing when we're studying kinship networks is we got to use everything. So you link all the crosswalks together and you identify all the potential kin using that approach. And by doing that, because we have the one link here in 1910, we're able to pull that parental ID to every single census year, which allows us to study those kinship networks. So using this approach right now, I think that's the University of Minnesota telling us it's a severe storm warning right now. So anyways, so family identifiers, right now what I've done so far is I have identified, using these approaches, I've identified mothers, fathers, children, and siblings. In theory, you could expand this to really any kinship relation: grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews, cousins, etc. For today's presentation, I'm just going to focus on mothers and fathers for simplicity. So I'm going to first present the results kind of for each linking method. So right now, keep in mind that this is the IPUMS MLP is based on an old version of IPUMS MLP. This does not include the Social Security Numident records right yet. So that's why the other household rates are so low here. But basically what we find is we identify about just shy of 60% of parents. Most of the MLP links, they're living with them in that year. And then starting around 1900, we start to identify more parents outside of the household of origin. Census tree, we find it's around 50% of cases you can identify. One thing I should clarify, I just realized I forgot to mention, is with this other relation, what that means is those are people I've identified who are living with, say, a sibling in 1900, and then in 1910, that sibling is living with a parent. So by extension, we assume that that parent is the parent of the person. And so what we find here is a similar pattern, kind of lower rates in the 19th century. In the 20th century, we start to identify significantly more parents outside the household. And by 1940, the majority of the parents that we can identify in the linked census tree data are living in a different household. For LifeM, it's kind of it's a little bit of a different story. But that has to do with the sample restrictions of LifeM. It's only analyzes the data for Ohio and North Carolina, essentially. And so what we find here is that over time, we identify more parents beyond the household, but in the earliest years, they're primarily living in the household. That makes sense because the people who are in 1880 they're linking to administrative records, those are almost certainly birth records for the majority of those cases. So the age cohort of the 1880 data those are almost all primarily children. And then I'm going to do one last slide about the data, and then I'll start talking about my kinship analysis. So basically, this graph here shows the percentage of conflicting mothers in the data. So this is a case where you have a linked record, you link it forward, and identifies two different mothers. It could be step-parent, a stepmother. It could be bad parental identifiers in the data. It could also be bad links. I'm not really deciding what's causing it. I'm just saying that's a conflict. We're going to ignore those cases. And so when we do that, we find IPUMS MLP in the 19th century has a 1 to 2% error rate in terms of conflicting mothers. By the 1900, that's essentially 0. Census tree is higher in the 19th century, around 5% of the cases in the linked data show conflicting mothers, but then they also show a very sharp decline in the 20th century. So moving on to the kinship analysis. So there's kind of two ways you can identify kin. The most obvious way to people are direct kin, what I've just been showing you. So you can actually say, oh, here's this person living relative to this person, we know their kin. The problem with that approach is that it's reliant on both cases being linked. And so it's going to act as a conservative measure or a floor to understanding kinship networks. So I developed a measure as part of my dissertation where that's a more indirect measure, and it's this, fun word, propinquity, that I've practiced it a lot, believe me, that measures the probability that two surnames randomly occur next to each other in the census. The census was enumerated sequentially, so when you look at an enumeration district, if a household is next to another household, not all the time, but most of the time, that means in reality, in geographic space, they did live next to each other. Of course, that distance can differ in terms of rural areas versus urban areas, but all in all, it's a relatively accurate measure for capturing the probability that surnames are occurring non-randomly. And then as a proxy of that, the assumption is if you have a high probability that two surnames are occurring next to each other non-randomly, the suggestion is it's because they're related. And then just I just want to clarify again one more time, when I'm talking about patrilineal kin and matrilineal kin, I'm referring to this at the couple level. So patrilineal is referring to the husband's kin and family, matrilineal is referring to the wife's kin and family. So the universe I'm going to present results for today are just for ever married women, and they can only have two possible surnames for this analysis. So the reason why is if in this first case you have one surname, and presumably that's her married name, so that means there's only one name. We can't capture the matrilineal line, so we exclude that case. And then this third one, even though the names do look similar, the Jarrow-Winkler scores here are too low. So I kind of say that those are unique names, and so there's a lot of reasons why there can be three or more surnames. It could be this, like I said, the threshold I chose. It could be a bad link. It could be remarriage. There's a lot of reasons for why that could happen, and so for that reason, again, I'm excluding anyone who has more than two surnames. And so that brings us to this table, which is just a quick summary of the sample sizes. So the left side here is the total number of linked ever married women in each of the data sets. There is some selection criteria going on here that I haven't really talked about and I don't really have time to. On the right side is the sample sizes for birth surnames for women. So these are ever married women who we can identify their birth surname for and do this indirect kinship measure. I will say that based on these current numbers, what the new analysis I'm in the process of running, the MLP and LifeM numbers will almost certainly go up and the census tree numbers are likely to go down. So finally, again, I just want to reiterate, these are not direct kin links I'm analyzing right here. And then I'm only analyzing Ohio and North Carolina. This is because of the current sample size of LifeM, but it's also because I'm still in the process of computing all the results. So this is showing the kinship rates for patrilineal and matrilineal kin by method. Because it's with patrilineal kin, we can still use the full cross-sectional data to analyze that. So I've included that as a comparison for the three methods. When it comes to patrilineal kin, they all perform relatively similar to the total population rate, which is good. When it comes to matrilineal kin, however, we see some very important differences in terms of the rates. They all show similar downward trends, just like the patrilineal kin propinquity rate, but the rates are different. I'm not sure why yet. My suspicion is it has to do with the underlying biases of these linked data sets. Looking at this, breaking these results down into age groups, what we find is a kind of a U-shaped life course pattern for the patrilineal side, and then just a downward trend on the matrilineal side. This makes sense from a technical perspective, because when you think about it with patrilineal line, once your kids start moving out of the household and in your mid-40s, then the kinship rate goes back up because they have the patrilineal surname typically. With matrilineal surnames, that doesn't happen. So that's why you see two very different patterns. It's not necessarily saying that matrilineal kin propinquity becomes less important over the life course. And then just quickly, this is the same graph except for 1940. The rates are much lower, but kind of a similar interpretation. So the limitations, like I said, what I just presented right here, this is an indirect measure of kinship networks. The plan is to start incorporating the direct links in this next stage of the research. And like I said, I think the two methods together will serve as a ceiling and a floor for understanding the evolution of kinship networks in the US. And then also the fact that there are underlying biases to these data sets that I'm still assessing on how they're affecting the results. So just to kind of wrap up here, because I think I'm at time, is basically the overall finding our preliminary finding is that there is this long run decline in kin propinquity, which has effects on different demographic likely has effects on different demographic outcomes. Obviously, this is still preliminary, but this is kind of the hypothesis I was going in, and at least the preliminary work confirms that. But what I think is more important is that this is going to be one of the first national level data sets that we have that actually can identify kin for a large majority of the population, and a much larger data set for identifying kin for ever married women. And related to that, I think that there's an avenue here to make improvements to our current record linkage. On that, I will end. Thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions.